And Martin, how are you today?
Okay, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank
One of the most absurd things that is going on at the moment is the cry that these reforms will herald dictatorship in Israel, when basically what these reforms do is to remove, is to move decision making from an unelected, unaccountable forum, i.e., the judiciary, to a elected and accountable forum, i.e., the parliament. And somehow people see this as being a threat to Israel democracy, when basically it's the epitome of enhanced democracy. And by taking hold of the public debate, in many ways because of the flaccid response of the right, by the way, they've managed to create enormous chaos in Israel. In many ways, threaten both its security, its economy, its diplomatic standing. And all this is done in the name of democracy and patriotism, where basically it's exactly the opposite. It's trying to keep a judicial dictatorship or judicial tyranny in place and undermine the country. So you have this, as I said before, this Orwellian dystopia in the country, which I think is a very, very grave threat to the future of the country, probably more than external threats like Iran and the Palestinian issue.
Yeah, there was a there was an attempt to reach a compromise. There were meetings at the president's residence, President Herzliya, with
I think
the government.
I think the right's efforts to reach a compromise
Yes, go ahead.
show how naive the right really is, because they do not fathom the depth of the animosity that the left has for it. They are approaching this issue as if there's some substantive disagreement between left and right. But there's no disagreement, because the left hasn't got a position. It's only got an ambition. Many of the people today who are opposing the judicial reform, like Yair Lapid and Gideon Saar, people in the opposition, expressed specific and explicit support for exactly the same measures not long ago. So the right wing is wrong in trying to find some middle ground. There's no middle ground. You can see it started off with a big reform. The government backpedaled and then tried to, and now it's trying to pass a very minor part of the reform, and that's producing exactly the same kind of resistance because the left wing doesn't want to reach an agreement. You could offer them anything. Even if you offered them exactly what they asked for, they would still oppose it because they need to undermine the strength of the right in the public. It's not about a substantive disagreement. It's about a struggle for power.
While we're waiting for Meir to get back on, could you address the issue of the reasonableness clause? Because that's very confusing, particularly to people outside of Israel, why that was ever enacted and how important it is to get rid of it. I mean, it is not democracy. When a group of judges...
Let me give you an illustration why the reasonableness clause must be removed. In 2004, a young social worker by the name of Tali Khatuel and 4 of her daughters were driving back home along what's known as the Kisufim route, and on the way they were ambushed by two Arab terrorists who opened fire from a deserted building and forced the car off the road, and then from point-blank range slaughtered the whole family, which included not only the mother, but 4 daughters aged, I think it was from age 4 to 11, sorry. And that they were slaughtered. Now, why this is so infuriating is because the army wanted to demolish the building from which the attack was launched, but the High Court intervened and prevented the demolition of the building. So the family was basically slaughtered because of the intervention of the High Court into security decisions. You could see many other things. For instance, a decision which I don't necessarily agree with was that some years ago, the Ministry of Finance wanted to impose taxes on rent from a third apartment. If you own 3 apartments, on the third apartment, you had to pay tax. And the High Court, over and over again, would not allow the law to be passed on the argument that the discussions on the law were not serious enough. Now this is amazing. It's stunning that the court can decide whether parliamentary discussions are thorough enough. And then, of course, there's the issue of the migrants from Africa who came in and basically invaded South Tel Aviv. And time again, the High Court intervened to stop government policy, which was to remove them from South Tel Aviv, and made the whole neighborhood crime infested, and even a murder was committed there. So you can see the intervention of the High Court in these policy decisions is absolutely insane, and a stop must be put to it. Because they're not saying that the government decision is illegal. It's just that it's not reasonable in the eyes of whom? In the eyes of the court. Now, there's no law of nature that says that the view of the judges of reasonableness is better than the elected parliament. After all, democracy is the power of the people. And if the elected representatives of the people cannot formulate policy, what's left of democracy? You're left with the tyranny of the courts.
It does seem that the reasonableness clause is an undemocratic means where those elected officials have no say in the final matter. And I think a lot of people criticizing Israel on the left, particularly in Israel and in America, don't really understand that. That wasn't the case in 1949 when Israel became a state. It was kind of slipped in afterwards, and we haven't been able to get rid of it. So I think that's important to stress, to the audience outside of Israel, why the system needs to be changed.
the system needs to be changed. I might have a more radical view of the issue, but there might be cases for saying that there must be some judicial review of government decisions to see that there's not extreme unreasonableness, like someone appointing their half-wit cousin to an important position in the government. So that there has to be extreme unreasonableness before there can be any judicial intervention. But as the examples I've given are just basically the judiciary has become the supreme legislator and the supreme executive. It's basically usurped much of the power, both of the government and of the parliament.
Yeah, presently we're hearing a lot.
And of course, the left wing supports this situation because they've been totally eviscerated in the polls. The left wing parties are minuscule today. They're supported by the strange phenomena of anti-Netanyahu right wingers who are basically propping up the left wing government. And in the previous government, because of anti-Netanyahu right-wing government, they put a radical leftists in position of power and influence. Fortunately, that government fell, but even so, they had time to create great damage. I just need to mention the agreement that the Lapid government formed with Lebanon, basically conceding potentially rich, gas-rich resources in the sea to a Hezbollah-dominated Lebanon, which supposedly was supposed to pacify Hezbollah, and we can see how ridiculous that is today, with Hezbollah spoiling for a fight.
Yeah, outside of Israel, the media internationally is passing this buzz around that there's a thought of a coup that's stemming in Israel right now because of the military who are not showing up for duty. Is that being an exaggerated situation, or is that sincerely a threat presently to the people of Israel?
Well, I don't know how much it's a tangible threat at the moment, but it certainly is an imminent threat. A lot of reservists, both in the Air Force and in intelligence, have been threatening that if the law passes, they will not show up for service under the pretense that their service is voluntary, and so they will no longer volunteer, which is of course basically just a cover, because the reserve forces rely on these volunteer reservists. So basically, by saying that they won't show up, they're in many ways undermining the army and possibly undermining Israel's ability to defend itself. Of course, Israel's enemies are watching this and rubbing their hands in glee, and no one seems to care. So in many ways, you could say that this, if they manage to impose the minority will on the majority, in many ways this would be a soft military coup, not with tanks, but by withholding service, because of the unique situation there is in Israel. And of course, this raises the question: who's going to defend the families of these people because if the Iranians or the Palestinians launch attacks, they're not going to discern who was for the reform and who was against the reform. They're basically putting their own families at risk.
Yeah. Right before we bring Meir back on the screen, Meir, are you there with us again? Can we hear you? Meir, no, for some reason from Toronto, the lead's not doing too well. So while we have a minute, we're hoping that Meir gets on, tell us a little bit more about the organization that you represent and that you founded, and what the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies actually does and accomplishes, for our audience who's unaware of it.
Well, the founding rationale of the Institute was to try and counteract the political correctness of most of the security institutes in Israel. Nearly all of them, almost without exception, or with very few exceptions, are radically on the left, which support territorial concessions which support a concessionary policy by Israel. And I feel this is a very dangerous position for Israel to adopt, particularly after the precedent of Gaza. When Israel left Gaza, everyone said, "Well, this will herald a new dawn for the Middle East," and it hasn't. Basically, Gaza has become a strategic threat, and in every instance where Israel has relinquished territory to Arab control, the territory has been used as a platform to attack Israel, whether it was in Gaza, whether it was in South Lebanon when Barak withdrew the Israeli troops from there very hastily and handed it over to an Islamic terrorist group. Even in Sinai, I mean, just by pure luck, it was nothing to do with Israeli policy, but it was just lucky that Sisi took over Egypt, because if the Muslim Brotherhood had stayed in power, no one knows what would have happened in Sinai. They could easily have supported anti-Israel elements who could attack Israel along its long southern border. And of course, when we withdrew from the towns in Judea and Samaria, these were taken over by terrorist groups, and the growing terror in the towns today proves the imprudence of withdrawing. So at the nucleus of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies is the belief that Israel must adopt an uncompromising hawkish ability if it's to preserve its security and maintain Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people over time. Otherwise, I feel that the Zionist enterprise will be lost.
Yeah, speaking of that whole concern, and for us skeptics out here in the diaspora, there's actually talk spinning off of the Abraham Accords of Saudi Arabia and Israel not being arch enemies anymore. Now, some people think it's great. Other people think it's just a ploy for Saudi Arabia to get closer to their desire to get rid of Israel. So how do you feel about this particular situation?
Well, I thought Netanyahu made a mistake when he gave up the demand for sovereignty over Judea or parts of Judea and Samaria for the Abraham Accords with the Emirates, because there were relations going on with the Emirates anyway. They were just unofficial. So basically, he gave up the demand for sovereignty in Judea and Samaria to formalize substantive relations which were informal but continuing anyway. And now Saudi Arabia, I'm a little skeptical. I'm sure that I'm not sure. Put this way, I'm not sure that the Saudis are planning something now which would be very devious and cunning and to try and weaken Israel. I don't know what they demand for that. It depends what the demand is for the relations. I mean, I would be very wary of making large Israeli concessions for Saudi Arabia, because I think Saudi Arabia probably needs Israel more than Israel needs Saudi Arabia. I think if relations with Saudi Arabia come at the expense of making far-reaching concessions, it wouldn't be worth it.
Many say that the enemy of your enemy is your friend, and the only reason Saudi Arabia is even talking to Israel is because of Iran. And now, behind closed doors, Iran and Saudi Arabia are talking, which puts even more of a threat.
I agree with you that if suddenly Iran surged in power, it would take Saudi Arabia with it. I don't think that if Saudi Arabia thought that Iran was a strong horse and Israel was the weak horse, that it wouldn't switch its preferences in a minute. And that, by the way, takes us back to the internal dissension in Israel, because that makes us look weak, looks divided, not ready for war. And that's a big danger of the internal dissension today over the judicial reform, which basically is just a choreographed event. In fact, Ehud Barak was bringing up exactly the same arguments in 2020. There's a new video out where he talks about that the Netanyahu government was using the COVID epidemic as a pretext to impose dictatorship, which of course was nonsense. And there's really blood-chilling part of the video where Barak says, well, he'll be called to lead the nation when Jewish bodies are floating in the Yalkon River.
Martin, let me just jump in for a moment. Martin, on the issue of judicial reform and those who are opposing the government. So when there was an election, not a long time ago, just 6, 7, 8 months ago, 64 seats the coalition has, and if you examine it in terms of demographics in Israel, what segment of the population who are citizens of Israel voted for this coalition? So that 64 seat number represents about 70% of the Jews in Israel, or more than 70% of the Jews in Israel who voted for this government. Whenever they do polls and they show that the so-called opposition is gaining in strength, that if there was an election today, they say so on and so forth. But they are dependent on Arab parties who are against Israel as a Jewish state, and they're dependent on the extreme left wing, like the Merits and so on and so forth, in order to try to topple the wishes of the majority of Jews in Israel. We see sometimes at these protests going on, the anti-government protests, Palestine flags, PLO flags being waved. I don't think that part of the narrative is being shared enough to bring this into the conversation. That it seems to me, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, that the issue, the heart of it, or part of the heart of the matter, is whether Israel should continue to be a Jewish state or whether it should be not a Jewish state. The Arab parties, there have been polls that have been done that the majority of Arab citizens of Israel, I think it's like 75%, do not accept Israel as a Jewish state. And approximately 25% of the Arabs who were polled said that if there would be a war against Israel, they would actually join that war. So I'm assuming that 25% of the Arab population in Israel who are citizens, that's like the younger who are saying they would be prepared to join a war against Israel. But yet, this opposition, they seem to be completely fine marching with them with PLO flags. Can you fill us in on that, on this kind of divide? Like, what is this fight about?
Well, one thing is for sure, that the opposition have no chance of establishing a government without the anti-Zionist Arab parties. Now, this again, in many ways, brings us back to judicial reform, because if you look at the current legislation, in the basic, no, not just an ordinary law, a basic law, which is a sort of a superior law, in the basic law on the Knesset, in clause 7a, it states quite clearly that any candidate or any party who denies Israel's status as a democratic and Jewish state cannot participate in the elections. And the High Court, time and time again, has allowed Arab parties, has ordered to allow Arab parties and Arab candidates who deny Israel's existence as a Jewish state to participate. So not only is the High Court not upholding the law, it's contravening the law.
Right.
And this is something that hasn't been pushed in. Many things haven't been pushed into the public debate, and in many ways, I think this is one of the accusations that can be leveled at the right wing, because the left wing are certainly guilty of sins of commission, but the right wing has been guilty of sins of omission. For not doing things. I mean, I've been saying now for over a decade that Israel should be spending 1.5% of the state budget on public diplomacy to present Israel's case to the world. Now, 1% doesn't sound much, or 1.5%, but that's between $1 billion and $1.5 billion. With $1 billion and $1.5 billion, you can change a lot of minds and win a lot of hearts. And Israel hasn't done that. And the right wing has been very flaccid and very impotent in presenting its case. It seems to have sort of shying away from confrontation with the left, as if the left have the moral high ground, where they don't. The left has been consistently wrong about everything, sort of never right, never repentant. The people today who are opposing the judicial reform, or the people who opposed taking the gas out of the ground and making Israel an energy exporter, the people who supported the Oslo agreements and brought armed Palestinian militias within mortar distance of parliament, the people who supported surrendering South Lebanon to the Hezbollah and transforming a terrorist nuisance into a strategic threat. It's the people, although it wasn't only the left wing with the disengagement from Gaza, but certainly the left wing didn't oppose the abandonment of Gaza. And again, which converted a terrorist threat into a terrorist nuisance into a strategic threat. So time and time again, the right has been wrong, but never repentant, never admitted its error. And now these same people are claiming the moral ground. And again, the right wing has been very, very reticent in pushing its case. I mean, the story of the Khatuel family that I talked about was slaughtered because of the intervention. It's not on the front burner. What's happened in South Lebanon, or South Tel Aviv, is not on the front burner. None of these interventions have been forced into the public debate. And I'm very pessimistic because it seems as if the right wing doesn't have the will to win. They do not know how to wage political warfare.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. It's as if we repeat a mantra. Well, he's a Jew, he's a Jew, he's a Jew, so he must see it the way we really do. Bottom line, and let's just bring him closer. And so, no, I think some people have crossed the red line there, and they're not for Israel as a Jewish state, and therefore, no, we have to use every tool at our disposal, call them out, and march to the finish line and get the job done properly without bending over backwards for those who sympathize or support the enemies of Israel.
Yeah, well, the people, it was Shimon Peres who first sort of set up or talked about a contradiction between being Jewishness and Israeliness. Right. So I'm not convinced. I mean, basically, I'm a secular person, but I feel Jewish. I think Jewish. For me, the Jewish state is a country that has the Star of David on the flag, that has the candelabras as the symbol of the country, that has Hebrew as the hegemonic means of communication, that has the calendar according to Jewish holidays and Zionist tradition. The whole public sphere is inundated with Jewish symbolism and Jewish content. That for me is a Jewish state. I'm certainly against the idea of a state of all its citizens, because that will degenerate into Lebanon. It will either be Lebanization of the country or Balkanization of the country, depending on how you look at it. But I think that would be a mortal danger. I don't think there would be anything that could generate enough cohesiveness to hold the country together if it was a country of all its citizens. And as I said, the courts have played a part in preventing that, because the courts should have disqualified countries or disqualified parties that have been calling to reject Israel as a Jewish state. I'm very concerned, and I tend to be pessimistic about the outcome, because I don't see any goodwill about, at least on the one half, of trying to reach a solution. In my eyes, the left is a little like the lady in the trial of Solomon, who was prepared to cut the baby in half.
Right. Right. I'm a little bit perplexed about, I mean, I heard what you said about Ehud Barak, and I'm aware of the videos going around. I'm aware of an article that came out. It was published in the Jewish press also, detailing, his goal of trying to have a military coup in Israel. I'm just wondering, bottom line, because they perceive certainly in the religious community, a demographic shift that they're the largest growing group in Israel, Orthodox Jews, and they don't want Orthodox Jews having anything to do with the Supreme Court or the direction of the country or the identity of the country. Would it be far-fetched to say that that what they want, or segments of this opposition, what they want, is some kind of a birth control problem for the Orthodox Jewish community in Israel?
They would never say that, but they keep complaining about the demographic trends. But there may be some demographic trends, but I don't think that's the point. The point is that policies fail. Everything that the left wing has done has failed. I mean, the fact that the left wing has been almost totally eradicated. The two real left wing parties, people who define themselves as left wing, is Meretz, who didn't get through the threshold, and the Labour Party, who now, according to the polls, won't get through the threshold. So as far as left-wing ideology, there isn't any left-wing ideology. I think the real divide today is not left and right. It's Netanyahu and anti-Netanyahu. That's the real divide. And I can't understand the animosity towards Netanyahu. I mean, I'm not an uncritical apologist for Netanyahu. I think the many things that he could have done and should have done and didn't do. But he's certainly been a transformational leader. And he's not getting credit for much of what he's done. I mean, Israel has been unrecognizably transformed under Netanyahu. If you look at what the country was 12 years ago and what it is today, even physically, you would recognize it with high rises and highways and everything, that restaurants and holiday resorts. It's progressed tremendously, and so I mean I don't know. I don't think Benny Gantz and Gideon Sa'ar, as much as I might oppose them, I don't think that they're for a state of all its citizens. In many ways, Gideon Sa'ar said he's further right than Netanyahu. I don't think I don't know about Lieberman, but. Even Yair Lapid. I don't know. You think that Yair Lapid is against Israel as a Jewish state? He's got this long tradition of his father and the Holocaust, and etc. But as I say, in many ways, this is two things. The rift is pro Netanyahu and anti Netanyahu, rather than because the left-wing ideology has become irrelevant.
Right. I mean, I don't disagree with what you said. I mean, obviously, Netanyahu has been a transformational prime minister for the state of Israel. In fact, when he was the finance minister under the government that it was led by Sharon put him in. When Sharon was leading the Likud party. Sharon had Netanyahu as the finance minister, and he transformed the economy to, it's absolutely booming and blossoming. And as regards to the other individuals that you mentioned, Yeah, that's right. They do say that they're for a Jewish state. They've been public about that, but at the same time, ready to join with Arab parties that don't accept Israel as a Jewish state and want legislation passed in Israel that in the Knesset that opposes the idea of a Jewish state and demonization of Israel. You know, in diaspora, we're working to try to get governments and on all levels and universities, campuses, to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And Israel, 100% supports the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, but it's not implemented in Israel. It's not implemented in the Knesset, as you cited before, that you do have the basic law that came into being. If you deny the existence of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, then you can't run for the Knesset. You can't be accepted, and yet they allow people in. The only one that they threw out, and the law was designed to stop Rabbi Meir Kahana, who was for Israel as a Jewish state, and but yet you have like they don't accept, for reasons beyond me, that I guess because of the Supreme Court in Israel, they're not implementing or saying that it's mandatory in the Knesset to be a Knesset member that you have to accept the IRA definition of anti-Semitism as a basics, and that would disqualify some people in the Knesset. How do you feel about that? We're supposed to be advocating for Israel, and you just can't have these foundational principles in the Jewish community implemented, especially in Israel.
Well, the problem is not so much in the Knesset, because the Knesset, in many cases, you have the Central Election Committee, and in many cases, the Central Election Committee has precluded candidates in the Arab parties, and that's been overturned by the High Court, and in my opinion, by totally disregarding the current legislation. So again, it all comes back to the judicial tyranny in the sense that no matter what the elected representatives of the people say, the High Court can overturn it, and this is why it must be to a certain degree defanged. Everybody's for a strong, independent judiciary, but it must be. It can't usurp the functions of the legislature and of the executive, and basically that's what happened. That's what's happened here. This is something that's been recognized time and time again. There's a speech by Judge Bork, I think it's Richard Bork, the well-known American jurist who was barred from the Supreme Court for having, I don't know, something about his views barred him from becoming a justice. Bork, I think his name is Bork, and he talks about. He says the prime example of judicial overreach is the Israeli Supreme Court, which is basically, as I said, usurped the powers of the legislature and the powers of the executive. And in many ways, this is not the root of all the evil, but the root of much evil in Israel.
Absolutely. Alan Dershowitz comes to Israel regularly, and he made a statement about the judicial reform. I mean, he says, he's pretty loud and clear. He said he hopes that a compromise could be reached, but he was also emphatic that in its original form, the judicial reform, that at worst, the justice system in Israel would reflect the justice system in Canada. And that to try to say that it's going to be a dictatorship or anything like that, says the people who are protesting have no idea what they're protesting. So, and he's, sort of on the left. He's a Democrat.
Twice voted for Obama, and I think he voted for Biden as well.
Right.
But I think that's a knee-jerk reaction rather than any intellectual analysis on his part. But you're right. What's happened is the protests in Israel have converted Dershowitz from a supporter, also converted him from opposing the judicial reform to being sort of almost a supporter of the judicial reform, which I think is quite illuminating. But you're right. Dershowitz has said quite emphatically that there's nothing in the judicial reform, not only the reasonableness clause, but the entire reform as proposed originally, that would make Israel a dictatorship. It would be something like Canada or Britain or New Zealand, it's extremely worrying. I mean, as I said before, I don't think this is driven by any real difference of opinion. I think they've just chosen a subject which they can choreograph and exploit for their own means, without any regard for what it does to the country. Because I think the animosity towards their political rivals overrides their affiliation for the national interest.
It certainly seems like that. Martin, let me thank you for joining us. We'll have you on many times moving forward. You're a sea of information on what's going on. There's no question about it. Any final words you could give to our viewers?
Well, I think we should all hold thumbs for the future of the Zionist enterprise, because I think it's entering a very grave state and facing extremely severe challenges. So it's going to take all the support we can get to see it through. Thank you.
We have, Tisha B'Av is coming up this week. We're going to be fasting that's the tradition that we have. But I always wonder, why are we really fasting? I mean, we have it it should be, to me, I think it should be, the rabbis say, in fact, when the Mashiach comes, Tisha B'Av will be transformed into a day of celebration. And I'm just, thinking out loud that Tisha B'Av should be a day of celebration now on, because we have the state of Israel. We have the possibility of raising up the states in every direction for ourselves, and we're holding ourselves. The Jewish people are holding themselves back. We have Harabayit, and we don't have thousands going up, but it's up to us. We could do it. We look how Israel is from 1948 to today. If that is not a modern day miracle and something to marvel at, and to say that this and the ingathering of the exiles and everything else, over 7 million Jews in Israel, there should be a different way of thinking.
It's nearly 9 million, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
What's that?
If I'm not mistaken, I think it's nearly 9 million.
Oh, the population. No, I'm saying the Jewish population in Israel is over 7 million.
The Jews, maybe, yeah, perhaps, I don't know, but I think it's more than 7 million, quite a lot more than 7 million.
And growing. And it's the largest Jewish community in the world. I mean, Israel, percentage-wise, it's over 50% of the Jews in the world live in Israel, and growing and enjoying, and it's an unbelievable thriving in every single direction. And yet we're still thinking backwards that it's a day of mourning, and we're just not there. We're not there because of us, and these protests are evidence of that.
The thing is, Israel has such a lot to be proud of, because in virtually every field of human endeavor, whether it's medicine or communications or science or water technology or whatever it is, Israel is on the cutting edge of human endeavor in every field, except perhaps in political leadership. There's an enormous amount to be proud of, and I think there should be far more cohesiveness than there is. Maybe just the Jews, just a fractious people, very cantankerous and enjoy brawling with each other.
It's interesting, very interesting. Thank you, Martin, for joining us, and we'll have you many times moving forward. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yehuda.